Okay, now let's talk about the product rule. And the product rule says that if we have this function, big f of x equals little f of x times g of x, so it's the product of two functions, the derivative of big f of x is going to be equal to f of x times the derivative of g of x plus g of x times the derivative of f of x. So in this video I'll be proving this, and we're going to be using the definition of a limit. So the derivative of f of x is equal to the limit as h approaches 0 of f of x plus h minus f of x all over h. So that's just the basic definition of a derivative. And now let's plug in f of x plus h and f of x. So this is going to be equal to the limit as h approaches 0 of, now I'm going to be using little f of x. So whenever I say f of x, I'm going to be talking about this little f of x. So the limit as h approaches 0 of f of x plus h times g of x plus h minus f of x times g of x. All that over h. So this is just rewriting that, plugging in what we know about f of x. So now this next step that I'm going to do, it might seem like, hey, how did you know that you were supposed to do that? And I mean, some of these proofs, that's why they take a long time to figure them out, because sometimes you got to be smart about the math. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract and add on a big f of x plus h times g of x, or I'm sorry, a little f of x. We're using little f of x from now on. So I'm going to subtract and add an f of x plus h times g of x. So let's see how that looks like. So we were here. So we have the limit as h approaches 0 of f of x plus h times g of x plus h. And here I'm going to show you that we're subtracting this term. So minus f of x plus h, g of x, and then I'm going to add that term. So because we're adding and subtracting this term, it doesn't really change the value. So we're allowed to do that. And then I'm going to finish that off with the rest of our original expression. All that over h. So all I did there was I subtracted and added this term, and you'll see how that helps me. So now I'm going to split this up. I'm going to split this up into two limits. I'm going to take the limit as h approaches 0 of this half, and then the limit as h approaches 0 of this half. So let's see how that looks like. We have the limit as h approaches 0 of f of x plus h, g of x plus h, minus f of x plus h, g of x, all over h, plus limit as h approaches 0 of this second half of the term, so f of x plus h times g of x minus f of x times g of x, and all of that is going to be over h. And now let's see what happens once I factor out, I'm going to factor out an f of x plus h on the left, on this left term, and I'm going to factor out a g of x on this right term. So what I'm going to get is the limit as h approaches 0 of f of x plus h times, on top we still have a g of x plus h minus, we're left with this g of x all over h plus second limit, and remember on this side I'm going to factor out a g of x. So we have a g of x times, and we're left with an f of x plus h minus f of x over h. And on this left turn, I'm going to evaluate this limit just for this first f of x plus h term. So if I set h to 0 on this f of x plus h, I'm left with an f of x. And then I still have the limit for the rest of g of x plus h minus g of x over h plus, so once again, g of x, if I evaluate it at the limit, that doesn't really do much because it's kind of a constant with respect to h, so not much that needed to be done there. And then I keep the limit for the second part. And notice, so we have that f of x, and notice that this term, limit as h approaches 0 of g of x plus h minus g of x over h, that's simply the definition of the derivative of g of x. So that's just simply g prime of x. And then we have this g of x, and once again notice that the limit of h, limit as h approaches 0 of f of x plus h minus f of x over h, that's the definition of the derivative of f of x. So that's f prime of x, and then from there we can say that the derivative of big F, f prime of x big F is equal to, well, simply this right here, f of x times g prime of x plus g of x times f prime of x. And as you can see, this is what we started with up here. This is what we said the product rule was, so we just proved the product rule. Definitely memorize this equation. And the next video, we'll go over just a couple practice problems.